It's time for an anatomy lesson, and this is exciting. We are starting the skeletal system, and we are starting with the names of the bones. There are 206 bones in the human body. There are more in children, around 270. Sometimes you'll see that number around 300. And the reason is their bones are not fully ossified, so they actually appear as separate bones. And we're going to start in general, moving superiorly and then inferiorly. It's not a perfect process, but that's the general plan. Cranium, your skull. Frontal, the forehead bone. Parietal, the two bones at the top of your skull. Temporal, the bone over here, one on each side. Occipital, the one at the back of your skull. That's the one where if you hit this part, you might see stars because that's where the vision section of your brain is. Ossicles, those are your middle ear bones. There are 3, and look how tiny they are. We have the malleus, which is the hammer, that comes first. The incus, which is the anvil, that comes second. And stapes, that's the stirrup, that comes third. The mandible, the jawbone. The atlas, which is your very first cervical vertebrae, and that's what your skull sits on top of. The hyoid bone right here, that's the tongue bone. This bone right here, you can kind of move it back and forth, and that provides attachment for the tongue muscles. Your cervical vertebrae in your neck, you have 7. Ribs, you have 12 pairs. And now we're going to differentiate the ribs even more. So your first 7 pairs of ribs are called true ribs, and they attach directly to the sternum. The next 5 pairs are called false ribs because they either attach indirectly just through cartilage or not to the sternum at all. So those floating ribs, our last 2 pairs, if you look at that picture, they don't even come all the way around. They don't attach to the sternum at all. So floating ribs are false ribs, but they're just another name. It's like a square is a type of rectangle, so a floating rib is a type of false rib. The clavicle is your collarbone. That's the most commonly broken bone. The scapula is your shoulder blade. The sternum is your breastbone, your heart protector. Your thoracic vertebrae, you have 12 of them. And coincidentally, you have 12 ribs. So that should help. Your humerus is your upper arm bone. The end right here, sometimes you hit and it's funny, so not so humorous. The radius is the forearm bone that is on the thumb side. Okay? The ulna is the forearm bone that is on the pinky side. Your lumbar vertebrae, you have 5, and they're in your lower back. Okay? You can see in the diagram, it's between your ribs and your pelvis. And your pelvis, you actually have 2 hip bones, and there are 3 fused bones in each one. So let's look at those. We have the ilium, so you have 2 of them, 1 on each side. We have the ilium, that's the biggest one. We have the ischium, that's the lower bone that's in the back. And then we have the pubis, that's the lower bone that's in the front. So all 3 of those bones have fused together to make the pelvic bone or hip bone. We have the sacrum, that's kind of your butt bone. It's 5 fused vertebrae. We have the coccyx, that's your tailbone, and that is made from 4 fused vertebrae. And you can see it's pretty small. Then we have the femur, that's your thigh bone. And now we're going to look at the hands, okay? So we have the carpals. Those are your wrist bones. We have the metacarpals, okay? Those are your hand bones. And then we're going to look at the phalanges. Okay, so you have 5 phalanges, and the phalange bone that is closest to your wrist, so the one that's going to be right here, those are called proximal to, and they're called the proximal phalanges, so they're closer to your wrist. Then we have the intermediate phalanges. There's not one in your thumb. Okay, the intermediate phalanges, those are in the middle. And then we have the distal phalanges in all of them, including the thumb, and that's the finger bone at the end, furthest from the wrist. We have your patella, which is your kneecap. Your tibia, that's your larger lower leg bone, and it's in your shin area. Your calf bone, and that's a much smaller bone, is the fibula. Your tarsals are your ankle bones. So now we're ready to look at the feet. Your calcaneus is your heel bone. The metatarsals are your foot bones. So just like your metacarpals were your hand bones and your carpals were your wrist, your tarsals are your ankle and your metatarsals are your foot bones. Your toe bones, just like your fingers, have proximal phalanges, so it would be closest to your ankle, and notice it's in all of your toes. And again, the intermediate phalanges are not in the big toe, but it's the bones in the middle. And then the distal phalanges, the toe bones that are at the ends of your toes, and that's in all of them. And there you have it. Wow, 206 bones. Now we didn't go through each individual little phalanges bone or carpal bone, but that's it. That's all of them.